They're expecting you to react exactly as you always have, with either destructive rage or pathetic pleading. They've already prepared their responses to both. Your anger will justify their story about your instability. Your begging will feed their need for control. Either way, they win the twisted game they've created. What they haven't prepared for is your centered clarity, your compassionate boundary, your refusal to either attack or abandon. This response exists outside their emotional vocabulary. When you neither diminish yourself nor attempt to diminish them, you introduce a paradigm so foreign that it disrupts the entire dynamic. Their confusion becomes the doorway to genuine transformation. The room fell silent as tears streamed down her face. She stood there broken, asking the question we've all asked at some point: why did they hurt me when I gave them everything? And in that moment, I realized something profound about human nature, about pain, and about the extraordinary power of response. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Your response to pain is more powerful than the pain itself. Today, I want to talk about the most disruptive force in human relationships. The capacity to respond to hurt in ways that transform not just your situation, but the very person who inflicted the pain. Have you ever noticed how some people can wound you deeply with just a few words? They know exactly where to strike. They understand your vulnerabilities. And when they attack, they expect a predictable response: anger, retaliation, bitterness, withdrawal. They're prepared for these reactions. But what happens when you respond in a way they never anticipated? That's what we're going to explore today. Not just how to survive when someone hurts you, but how to respond in such a powerful way that you completely transform the dynamic. We're going to discover how to confuse those who hurt you by responding from a place they cannot comprehend. Let me ask you something. When was the last time someone wounded you deeply? Think about it. Perhaps it was a betrayal by someone you trusted completely. Maybe it was a harsh criticism that cut to your core. Or perhaps it was simply being ignored or dismissed by someone whose approval you desperately sought. Now, how did you respond? Most of us follow predictable patterns when we're hurt. We either strike back immediately, attempting to inflict equal or greater pain, or we withdraw, nursing our wounds and building walls to prevent further injury. Or perhaps we suppress the pain, pretending it doesn't exist while it festers within us. These responses are natural. They're instinctive, but they're also expected. The person who hurt you is prepared for these reactions. In fact, they may even be counting on them. What would happen if you responded differently? What would happen if, instead of reacting from your wound, you responded from your purpose? This is the great confusion I want to talk about. It's not about manipulation or games. It's about accessing a dimension of response that transcends the natural human reaction to pain. You see, most people live their entire lives at the mercy of other people's actions toward them. They are like emotional ping pong balls bounced back and forth by the words and behaviors of others. Someone smiles at them, they feel good. Someone frowns at them, they feel bad. Someone praises them, they're elated. Someone criticizes them, they're devastated. This is a form of emotional slavery, and it's completely unnecessary. Your value is not determined by other people's assessment of you. Your worth is not established by other people's treatment of you. Your destiny is not controlled by other people's opinions of you. When you truly understand this, not just intellectually, but deep in your spirit, you gain the ability to respond to hurt in ways that confuse those who would harm you. Let me share a principle with you. Pain always reveals something, but what it reveals depends on you. For most people, pain reveals their vulnerabilities, their insecurities, their fears. But for the person who understands their true value, pain reveals their character, their convictions, their purpose. I remember counseling a couple of years ago. The wife had discovered her husband's unfaithfulness. She was devastated, as anyone would be. Her initial response was rage, followed by deep depression. Both responses were natural, human, understandable. But after some time of reflection and spiritual growth, she approached her husband with something he never expected. Not blind forgiveness that ignored the offense. Not bitter resentment that refused reconciliation. She approached him with clarity. What you did wounded me deeply, she told him. But I refuse to let your actions determine my character. I choose to forgive you, not because what you did was acceptable, but because bitterness would only imprison me. I choose to offer you the opportunity for restoration, not because you deserve it, but because I believe in the possibility of redemption. However, trust must be rebuilt through consistent actions over time, and I will require complete transparency going forward. Her husband was utterly confused. He had prepared himself for rage. He had steeled himself against tears and accusations. But this response, this mixture of dignity, clarity, compassion, and strength, he had no defense against this. That confusion created space for transformation. Within that confusion, he began to see himself clearly for the first time. He began to understand the depth of his betrayal, not through her condemnation, but through her composure. He began to recognize the value of what he had risked, not through her desperate clinging, but through her calm detachment. Their marriage was eventually restored, stronger than before. Not because she ignored or minimized the pain, but because she responded to it from a place of purpose rather than reaction. This is what I mean by confusing the one who hurts you. When they strike, expecting you to crumble, and instead you stand firm. When they attack, expecting you to retaliate, and instead you respond with dignified clarity. When they betray, expecting you to become bitter, and instead you maintain your commitment to your values. This kind of response is disruptive. It's unexpected. It creates cognitive dissonance in the mind of the one who sought to harm you. And within that dissonance lies the potential for real change, both in them and in you. But how do we access this kind of response? How do we transcend our natural reactions to pain? It begins with understanding your true identity. As long as your sense of self is derived from other people's treatment of you, you will always be at their mercy. But when you recognize that your value is inherent, not assigned by others, you gain the freedom to respond rather than react. Next, you must develop emotional maturity. Emotional maturity is not the absence of feelings. It's the ability to feel deeply without being controlled by those feelings. It's the capacity to experience hurt without being defined by that hurt. Third, you must cultivate a vision bigger than your pain. When your life is guided by purpose, pain becomes contextual rather than central. It's still real. It still hurts. But it doesn't dominate your decision making or hijack your future. Finally, you must practice forgiveness as a discipline, not just an event. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending you weren't hurt. It doesn't mean allowing harmful behavior to continue. It means releasing the right to pay back so that you can move forward unburdened. Let me be clear. This approach to hurt isn't passive or permissive. It's not about becoming a doormat or enabling abuse. In fact, it often requires greater courage and strength than retaliation does. Sometimes the most powerful response to hurt includes establishing firm boundaries or even removing yourself from toxic relationships. The difference is in the spirit behind these actions. Are you erecting boundaries out of fear and bitterness or out of clarity and self-respect? Are you leaving a relationship to punish the other person or to preserve your own well-being and dignity? The quality of your response to hurt will ultimately determine the quality of your life. Because hurt is inevitable. In any meaningful relationship, in any significant endeavor, In any authentic community, there will be pain. People will disappoint you. They will misunderstand you. They will sometimes deliberately wound you. Your power lies not in preventing these hurts, but in transforming them through your response. I want you to imagine for a moment, what would your life look like if you were no longer emotionally hijacked every time someone hurt you? What would your relationships look like if you could respond to betrayal with neither naive trust nor cynical withdrawal, but with wise discernment? What would your impact be if you could transform conflict through unexpected responses? Most people never experience this kind of freedom because they remain trapped in reactive patterns. They're perpetually swinging between fight and flight, between attacking and withdrawing. They're consistently predictable in their responses to pain, which means others can manipulate them through their wounds. But you can choose differently. You can develop the capacity to stand in the fire of hurt without being consumed by it. You can learn to access responses that confuse and disrupt the negative expectations others have of you. This capacity doesn't develop overnight. It's cultivated through daily choices, through consistent practice, through intentional growth. It happens as you continually choose purpose over pain, principles over emotions, growth over comfort. Let me tell you something powerful. The person who has hurt you is expecting you to become like them in your response. They expect you to return hurt for hurt, anger for anger, manipulation for manipulation. When you refuse to mirror their behavior, when you respond instead from your highest values, you disrupt this expectation in ways that can lead to profound change. There's a remarkable story about a community that was deeply divided. Two prominent leaders had engaged in a bitter public dispute that had fractured relationships throughout the entire group. One leader had spoken harsh, untrue words about the other, damaging his reputation and undermining his influence. Everyone expected an equally vicious response. They braced themselves for a conflict that would force them to choose sides. The tension was palpable as they waited for the inevitable retaliation. But it never came. Instead, the wounded leader did something extraordinary. He publicly acknowledged the pain of the situation without attacking his accuser. He reaffirmed his commitment to the community's shared values and vision. And then, most surprisingly, he invited his adversary to collaborate on an initiative that would benefit those most vulnerable in their community. The response left his attacker utterly confused. Prepared for combat, he instead faced collaboration. Expecting defensiveness, he encountered openness. Anticipating hostility, he found himself invited into partnership. This confusion created the space for something remarkable to happen. Unable to sustain his attack in the face of such an unexpected response, the aggressor began to question his own motives. The community, witnessing this exchange, saw a demonstration of leadership that transcended the pettiness of personal conflict. Eventually, the two leaders reconciled and went on to accomplish together what neither could have achieved alone. Their story becomes a powerful testament to the transformative potential of responding to hurt from purpose rather than reaction. This is the deeper wisdom I want to impart today. When someone hurts you, they're usually operating from their own wound, their own limitation, their own distorted perspective. They attack you from their pain, and they expect you to respond from yours. But what if you responded from your purpose instead? What if, instead of matching their limitation with your own, you introduce the possibility of transformation through your response? Most of us have been conditioned to believe that being strong means never showing that you're hurt. Or alternatively, making sure that those who hurt you hurt even more. But true strength isn't found in emotional numbness or in revenge. True strength is found in the capacity to acknowledge pain without being controlled by it, to experience hurt without allowing that hurt to dictate your response. This is where wisdom enters. Wisdom asks, what response in this moment would align with my deepest values and serve my highest purpose? Wisdom recognizes that how you respond to mistreatment says more about you than it does about the person who mistreated you. I've observed that many of the most bitter, cynical people I've met are those who have allowed themselves to be defined by how others have treated them. They've given others the power to determine not just their momentary emotions, but their enduring character. Every slight, every rejection, every betrayal has hardened them, making them less capable of the very thing they most desire, authentic connection. Conversely, I've known people who have endured tremendous hurt, genuine injustice, profound betrayal, devastating loss, yet have maintained their capacity for compassion, for trust, for love. Not because they're naive or in denial about their pain, but because they've refused to allow that pain to determine who they become. What's the difference between these two types of people? It's not the severity of what they've experienced. It's how they've interpreted and responded to those experiences. Those who remain bitter have embraced a narrative of victimhood. This happened to me, therefore I am diminished. Those who grow through their hurt have embraced a narrative of development. This happened to me, and I will use it to become more than I was before. The first narrative places all the power in the hands of those who hurt you. The second narrative places the power squarely in your own hands. This is why your response to hurt is so crucial. It's not just about a momentary interaction. It's about the person you are becoming through that interaction. Each time you respond to hurt, you're not just affecting a situation, you're reinforcing neural pathways, establishing emotional patterns, and shaping your character. So what does it look like to respond in ways that confuse those who hurt you? First, it means refusing to mirror their behavior. When they attack, they expect you to attack back. When they manipulate, they expect you to counter-manipulate. When they withdraw, they expect you to pursue or withdraw further. Breaking these expected patterns creates confusion, and within that confusion lies the opportunity for new dynamics to emerge. Second, it means responding with integrity rather than strategy. There's a crucial difference between responding wisely and responding manipulatively. If your goal is simply to throw the other person off balance or to gain an upper hand, you're still operating from the same paradigm of power struggle. But if your goal is to maintain your own integrity while creating space for genuine resolution, you're operating from a different paradigm altogether. Third, it means distinguishing between the person who hurt you and the action that caused the hurt. This doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior. It means recognizing that people are more than their worst moments, more than their most hurtful actions. When you can separate the person from the behavior, seeing the humanity, even in those who have wounded you, you access responses that can be both boundaried and compassionate. Fourth, it means being willing to engage in courageous conversations rather than either attacking or avoiding. Most people swing between aggressive confrontation and passive avoidance. Both approaches prevent genuine resolution. The alternative is to engage directly but constructively, addressing issues without attacking character, expressing hurt without seeking to hurt in return. I've found that when people hurt you, they often expect you to either lash out or shut down. When you do neither, when you remain engaged but regulated, honest but not hostile, they don't know how to respond. This disruption of the expected pattern creates the possibility for genuine dialogue rather than destructive conflict. None of this is easy. When we're hurt, our instinct is to protect ourselves through counterattack or withdrawal. Choosing a different response requires overriding these powerful instincts. It demands a level of emotional regulation and clarity of purpose that develops only through intentional practice. But with each small choice to respond from purpose rather than reaction, you're building the capacity for even wiser responses in the future. You're developing emotional muscles that most people never exercise. You're becoming the kind of person who can transform conflict rather than merely engage in it or avoid it. And here's what's truly remarkable. As you develop this capacity within yourself, you begin to call it forth in others. Your unexpected responses create a space where others can access their better selves. Your refusal to engage in the familiar dance of hurt and counterattack opens the possibility for new, healthier patterns of interaction. The workplace had become toxic. A talented professional found himself the target of a colleague's persistent undermining. In meetings, this colleague would subtly dismiss his ideas. Behind his back, she would raise questions about his competence. The pattern had been going on for months, affecting not just his confidence, but his entire experience of work. His friends advised confrontation. His family suggested he report her to management. Both responses would have been perfectly reasonable. But he chose a different path. The next time she publicly questioned his judgment in a meeting, he didn't defend himself or counterattack. Instead, he turned to her and said, "You've raised an important concern. I value the opportunity to hear more of your perspective. Could we set aside some time to discuss this further?" The room fell silent. His colleague was visibly taken aback. She had prepared for defensiveness or hostility, not genuine engagement. When they later met privately, he approached the conversation with remarkable clarity. "I've noticed a pattern in our interactions," he told her. "It feels like there's tension between us that's affecting our work. I want to understand if I've done something to contribute to this dynamic. And I also want to find a way forward that allows both of us to collaborate effectively." His sincere curiosity and lack of accusation created space for honesty. Eventually, she admitted that she'd felt threatened by his talents and had been trying to diminish him to elevate herself. This admission was possible only because his unexpected response had disrupted the pattern of animosity between them. Their relationship transformed from that point forward. Not instantly and not without occasional relapses into old patterns. But his refusal to respond as expected had created an opening for something new to emerge. This example illustrates a profound truth. The way you respond to hurt determines whether that hurt becomes a wall or a bridge in your relationships. Most hurtful interactions become walls. They create distance, resentment, guardedness. But occasionally the response to hurt can transform the very hurt itself into a bridge toward deeper understanding and connection. I want to emphasize something important here. This approach is not about denying your pain or suppressing your natural emotional responses. It's not about becoming emotionally detached or above it all. In fact, it requires deep emotional awareness and authenticity. The goal isn't to not feel hurt when you're wounded. The goal is to feel that hurt fully without allowing it to dictate your response. This requires developing the capacity to create space between what you feel and what you do with those feelings. Most people have little to no gap between stimulus and response. Someone hurts them and they react immediately from that hurt. Their responses are as predictable as they are ineffective. But as you develop emotional maturity, you expand that gap between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. Within that gap lies your freedom, your power, your uniqueness as a human being. Think about the people who have had the greatest positive impact on your life. I suspect many of them demonstrated this capacity. Perhaps it was a parent who responded to your adolescent rebellion, not with matching hostility, but with steady love. Maybe it was a teacher who saw past your disruptive behavior to your underlying potential. Perhaps it was a friend who refused to withdraw when you pushed them away during a difficult period in your life. These relationships transform us precisely because the other person refused to mirror our limitations. They responded not to who we were being in the moment, but to who they knew we could become. You have the opportunity to be this kind of transformative presence in the lives of those around you, even those who have hurt you. Not by excusing their behavior or pretending it didn't impact you. Not by suppressing your authentic emotions or denying your legitimate needs. But by accessing responses that create possibility rather than perpetuate patterns. This is particularly powerful in close relationships with family members, romantic partners, longtime friends. These relationships inevitably involve hurt because they involve vulnerability. The closer someone is to you, the greater their capacity to wound you. Many people respond to this reality by either avoiding deep connection altogether or by engaging in relationships characterized by power struggles, emotional manipulation, and patterns of hurt and counterattack. Both approaches prevent the experience of genuine intimacy. The alternative is to develop the capacity to remain open even when you've been hurt. Not naively open, not without appropriate boundaries, but fundamentally willing to see beyond the hurt to the possibility of healing and growth. When you respond to hurt from this place of purpose and possibility, you confuse those who have wounded you. They expect you to either attack or withdraw. They're prepared for rage or coldness. They're ready for accusations or silence. But when you respond with clarity, without hostility, with boundaries, without bitterness, with honesty, without attack, they don't know what to do with that. Their familiar script has been disrupted. The expected dance has been declined. And in that moment of confusion, something new becomes possible. Not just in them, but in you. Because each time you choose a response aligned with your highest values rather than your immediate emotions, you become more of the person you're capable of being. This is the ultimate aspiration, not to never be hurt, but to never be diminished by how others treat you. To experience pain without becoming it. To be wounded without allowing that wound to define you. There exists a profound distinction between reacting and responding. A reaction is automatic, driven by emotion, often unconscious. A response is intentional, aligned with values, fundamentally conscious. Most people spend their lives reacting to circumstances, particularly painful ones. You develop the capacity to truly respond. Consider the typical patterns that emerge when someone hurts you. The first instinct is often to hurt back, to ensure they feel at least as much pain as they inflicted. This reaction seems to promise satisfaction, even justice. But have you noticed how hollow that promise proves to be? Retaliation may provide momentary relief, but it never delivers lasting resolution. Instead, it perpetuates cycles of hurt that can continue for years, even generations. The alternative isn't passive acceptance of mistreatment. It's responding in ways that simultaneously honor your worth and create opportunity for genuine resolution. It's maintaining your dignity without diminishing others. It's establishing boundaries without building walls. One of the most powerful responses to hurt is genuine curiosity. When someone wounds you, they expect defensiveness. But what if you responded with questions aimed at understanding rather than accusation? What led you to say that? Help me understand what's happening between us. What did you hope would result from that action? These questions aren't asked to excuse harmful behavior, but to disrupt the expected pattern of attack and counterattack. They create space for the other person to become conscious of their own motivations and for you to respond to the full situation rather than merely the surface behavior. Another powerful response is to name the impact without attacking the character. When you said that, I felt dismissed and devalued communicates your experience without making claims about their intentions or identity. This type of statement is honest about the hurt without weaponizing it. Perhaps most powerful is responding to hurt with clarity about your boundaries and values. I care about our relationship, but I cannot accept being spoken to that way. I'm open to resolving this, but I need the conversation to be respectful. This response neither attacks nor capitulates. It simply establishes what you will and won't participate in. These responses confuse people who operate from manipulation and control because they expect you to either fight or flee. When you do neither, when you remain engaged but not entangled, honest but not hostile, you introduce a mode of interaction they likely have little experience with. This is especially true for those who have developed patterns of hurting others as a means of control. They've learned that if they criticize harshly enough, others will comply to avoid further criticism. They've discovered that if they withdraw emotionally, others will often compromise their needs to regain connection. They've found that explosions of anger can effectively silence disagreement. When these tactics no longer produce the expected results, when their attempt to control through hurt is met with centered clarity rather than either fearful compliance or retaliatory attack, the entire dynamic shifts. Suddenly, the relationship is operating on different terms. The ultimate test of this approach comes when the hurt inflicted is profoundly unjust. It's relatively easy to respond with maturity to minor slights. But what about devastating betrayal? What about systemic mistreatment? What about deliberate cruelty? The deeper the wound, the more powerful the potential transformation, both for you and for the relationship. But this requires something beyond ordinary emotional capacity. It requires accessing a dimension of response that transcends the natural human reaction to injustice. This is where purpose becomes essential. When you're connected to a purpose larger than your personal comfort or even your personal justice, you gain access to responses that would otherwise be impossible. Your purpose might be spiritual, to embody certain values regardless of how others treat you. It might be relational, to break generational patterns of conflict and create new possibilities for those who come after you. It might be societal, to demonstrate alternatives to the cycles of hurt and retaliation that perpetuate division. Whatever your purpose, it provides a navigational system for responding to hurt in ways that align with your deepest values rather than your immediate emotions. As we conclude today, I want to leave you with this truth. The way you respond when you're wounded reveals more about who you are than almost anything else. It's easy to be kind when you're treated kindly. It's natural to be generous when you're shown generosity. But how you respond when you're mistreated, that reveals your true character. I encourage you to see each hurt not as merely something to get through, but as an opportunity to demonstrate who you truly are. Not through denial of the pain, but through transcending the expected response to it. When you respond to hurt from your highest self rather than your wounded self, you not only create the possibility for healing in that specific relationship, you become a living demonstration of what's possible in all relationships. You become an agent of transformation in a world desperately in need of new patterns of human interaction. This is how you truly confuse those who hurt you. Not through games or manipulation, but through responses so aligned with your purpose that they transcend the ordinary human reactions to pain. In that transcendence lies the power to transform not just your relationships, but yourself.